The year was 1972, and the life of physicist Harold Puthoff will never remain the same again. He witnessed something that he spent his whole life disproving, but right there, in his very presence, he saw it. By only thinking about it, American artist and psychic Ingo Swann changed the magnetic field inside a thickly insulated vacuum container buried underground with his mind. And he did it for several seconds to avoid it being called a fluke or luck. Harold Puthoff, a physicist at Stanford Research University, was mind-blown as he saw the output of his magnetometer vary. There was no physical reason for the reading to alter its pattern, and yet he could see it. To confirm it was really Ingo's work, Harold told him to stop thinking about it, and as soon as he did, the unexplained changes in the magnetic field abruptly stopped. This right here would be the basis of what would end up being a decade's worth of governmental clandestine operations that lasted decades and cost $20 million by the end of 1995, which by today's standards would be worth $41 million. By the time Puthoff and his colleague Russell Targ, another physicist at the Stanford Research Institute, now known as SRI International, presented their results at an international meeting on quantum physics and parapsychology, the CIA had already begun working with SRI to perform top-secret research on paranormal phenomena, which is famously known as remote viewing for intelligence collection. Remote viewing refers to a type of extrasensorial perception in which one uses the mind to see or control far-off objects, people, events, or other information concealed from direct view. The CIA was the first government organization to investigate parapsychology as it pertains to intelligence gathering. The project started in 1961, when the Technical Services Division's Office of Technical Service developed an interest in ESP claims. Under the guidance of Project Ultra, Stephen I. Abrams, director of the Parapsychology Laboratory at Oxford University, England, reviewed parapsychological research and prepared an article stating that, at most, ESP had been shown to exist but was neither understood or controllable. After that report, the field was inactive, and nothing was done about it at the CIA for 10 years. Then, in 1972, Russell Targ continued the research and contacted the CIA to explore paranormal ability. He suggested an SRI psychokinetic ability demonstration to prove the existence of psychic abilities. This was the demonstration I talked about in the intro. He followed up this demonstration with more demonstrations, and the CIA was pleased. They were interested and funded the operation with a $50,000 contract awarded to Russell and Howard to further study this phenomenon under the codename Project Stargate. Some of the experiments carried out to test the effectiveness of remote viewing were: is remote viewing possible? Is distance a factor? Can coordinates be used to target a viewer? Can real-time events be remotely viewed? Can shielding be used to block remote viewing? And lastly, who could do this? The answer to the first question was a resounding yes. One thing the SRI researchers found out during their research was that remote viewing was in fact a human perceptual ability. Let me break it down further so you'll understand. Human perceptual ability is the ability to interpret and make sense of sensory information from the environment, such as seeing, hearing, smelling, and touching. These abilities are essential for survival and thriving, and are also important for activities like reading, listening, and navigating spaces. So basically, normal human things. So by that logic, that means the research done showed that everyone is a remote viewer or a psychic. To support their findings, they referenced several more papers in which different labs and researchers have duplicated the remote viewing research at SRI. This data led the CIA to think that, with reasonable financing, there was good cause to explore the field. Now, to answer the second question, SRI researchers carried out a number of remote viewing studies with targets several thousand kilometers away in locations like New York, Dayton, and even the Soviet Union. After analyzing the result of this experiment, they found out that there was no loss in accuracy or resolution. Distance was not a factor. So that meant a remote viewer could be watching you click the subscribe button all the way from Australia. Basically, all the questions they asked came back with a resounding yes, except for one we don't know about, and that's because it was redacted. And I want to assume that for it to be redacted, there are chances the answer is also yes. Despite the results of these experiments, not everyone believed all these stories. That's like North Korea coming to tell us they are democratic, and we have to take their word for it. No test or real application whatsoever. Now, I'm sure most of you watching this video are already cursing the CIA about how they were wasting taxpayers' money on rubbish things like this. I mean, what's next? Create an Avenger team with Nick Fury in charge? This was exactly the same thing most people in the CIA said. They felt it was a waste of money that could have been used to topple another government. So the CIA kind of gave an ultimatum to the research team of Russell and Howard to show them the practical application of this, or they kissed their funding goodbye. So the research team doubled down, and they got somewhat of a breakthrough in 1973. In the summer of 1973, as part of the enlarged effort helped to inspire CIA-sponsored parapsychology studies, an SRI subject received the coordinates of a vacation property and was told to write out what he saw. There was nothing on the piece of paper other than just the coordinates, so there was no way for this person to be influenced by external factors. With just the coordinates, he described the site as a military-like facility. Immediately as he said that, the research team gave a sigh of defeat. Their star test subject was wrong. The coordinates were actually for a vacation cottage and had nothing governmental or military close to it. So they were wrong. However, a few months later, the CIA visited the location to investigate the psychic claim thoroughly, and they discovered that truly, there was a secret government installation a few miles from the vacation property. Even the CIA didn't know about this property's existence. With this discovery, their faith in the program increased, as well as the funding. Do you know what this means for the spy community? They could infiltrate any government without being there. Soldiers trained on RV could sense danger ahead and potentially save lives. And terrorist cells and illegal nuclear reactors could be discovered without risk to human lives. A lot of positives. And then a thought crossed their mind. If we could do this, spy on their government without being seen and all that, that would also mean their enemies could also do the same to them, especially the Soviets, and that made them very worried. You see, the start of the CIA's interest in all this can be traced back to the Soviets, and further back to the Nazis. The start of this practice could be traced to Germany during World War II, when the scientific organization Ahnenerbe, led by Heinrich Himmler, devoted an entire branch to studying supernatural phenomena. This covert program was uncovered by the United States during a raid on his property in 1945. It mostly consisted of a collection of magical relics gathered from conquered countries, as well as odd findings from worldview archaeological projects. But when they came across the idea of psychic warfare, it sounded plausible. The Soviet Union also happened to gain access to the archives from the project during this time, and so the two new superpowers began fearing what the other may accomplish by studying paranormal and extrasensory activities. While the US was still contemplating on pursuing the research, they got news that the Soviets had invested 60 million ruble into the psychic research, which was a lot of money, which also made the United States worry. If their enemy was putting this amount of money into this field during the crux of the Cold War, then it would be foolish not to consider this too. Nina Kulagina, who had served in a tank regiment during the Second World War, was among the few Soviets to become well known for her psychic ability. Soviet scientists examined her after she supposedly could move objects with her mind. The most concerning accounts originated from a 1970s laboratory experiment whereby she allegedly used her thoughts to control a frog, finally stopping its heart. At first, skeptics said it was a lie, and because there was no footage, they concluded the story was all made up. No video, no proof. Then, the footage was released, and the skeptics changed the narrative to say she was a fraud, that she was using tricks to deceive people. They refused to believe someone could have that power. But the military and the CIA didn't see it that way, and truly believed this was something that could be exploited for warfare. And it wasn't long before they put that idea and notion to the test. SRI performed the first military parapsychology-based intelligence-gathering operation to show the practical application of remote viewing in a military setting. The target was an unidentified research and development Facility 3 at Semipalatinsk, Soviet Union, and the remote viewer had to draw what he saw at the location. The remote viewer drew an incredible and exact description of a crane that was in the location. Additionally, he described buildings under construction and some spherical tank sections. The remote viewer who performed this feat was the one and only Pat Price. This man single-handedly reinvigorated this program with his psychic, or should I say, remote viewing, to the point that the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy all wanted to be part of this CIA program. Yet, to most critics, this wasn't enough proof that remote viewing works. You see, despite the outstanding success of identifying a crane and the construction of buildings in the Soviet Union, which was miles away from the location he was in the United States, that still didn't satisfy some critics. Because, to be fair, some of his prognoses in the same remote viewing mission were wrong. So the critics said that even though he got some right, he got a lot wrong, so they didn't believe in the future of the project. They wanted practical application, and they wanted it now. But all of that notion would change, because Pat Price just kept on delivering results like he was a mailman. Pat Price was assigned the task of finding code rooms in 2 foreign embassies. Guess what? He found it. He was also given a set of geographical coordinates in Libya. With this only, he described a guerrilla training site and an underwater sabotage training facility several hundred kilometers away on the sea coast. This new information produced by Price was later verified by a reconnaissance team, and the undersea facility was similar to the description given by a collateral agent. The Libyan desk officer quickly asked for more data, and these requests were given to Price. Now, this is where things start getting spooky. Price has proven himself on multiple occasions. So at this point in time, when he says something is there, there's a 60% chance that something is actually there. I say this because in one of his remote viewing missions, he got a strong signal coming from 4 different mountains all over the world.
An attractor can call a viewer to it because it is more interesting. You might be drawn to the noise, the fire, the emotions at the site that pulls a remote viewer to it.
And when he poked further at this attraction because it was too strong to ignore, he discovered what he could only make out as, and I kid you not, 4 subterranean alien bases. One was under Mount Perdido, some distance between France and Spain. Another was under Mount Inyangani in Zimbabwe. Another one lay beneath Mount Zeal in Australia. And the last one was in Alaska under Mount Hayes. But it was the one in Alaska under Mount Hayes that bugged him the most, and coincidentally, where he found the supposed alien base just happens to be right in the middle of the Alaska Triangle. The Alaska Triangle is like the Bermuda Triangle, but for that region, and while the Bermuda Triangle has been proven to be nothing strange, the Alaska Triangle fails that test, with numerous disappearances that can't be explained occurring in that area. But this video is not about the Alaska Triangle, or surprisingly, the alien base discovered in it, which again, has not been proven to be false. I did a deep dive into that phenomenon in one of our videos, and you can watch it to understand what Pat Price saw. Because whether he saw an alien or not, 2 days later, after he submitted his reports to the superiors, Pat Price died of a supposed heart attack, and the CIA-sponsored intelligence collection tests were ended. Now, if you strongly believe in alien cover-ups, you'd say it was the government. But if you are logical and believe only in facts and data, you'd still say it's the government because he was making headways in intelligence gathering. We've been looking at the enemy as an outsider, the Soviets, the Chinese, but what if the enemy is also within as a double agent? Either way, Pat Price being the only respectable remote viewer who even convinced hard logical skeptics to become believers of this program, suddenly died 2 days after he discovered the terrorist cell in Libya and the alien base. His death was a major blow to the program, but luckily, before his death, he had convinced everyone who needed convincing that this program needed to be funded more. By now, the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, started showing interest. The Army, Navy, and Air Force financed several research programs at SRI. Now, despite all these amazing feats done by remote viewers, there were still skeptics in the CIA that only looked at what didn't work, the half-cup-empty kind of people. And because of that, they provided enough evidence to ensure the shutdown of the program. After the CIA stopped working with the program in the late 1970s, the DIA stepped in and the program relocated to Fort Meade in Maryland, under funding from the Defense Intelligence Agency. The name changed, but the research and the results stayed the same. But now, Project Stargate was now known as Operation Grill Flame. DIA's research aimed primarily in 3 directions. 1. Determine how to apply remote viewing to intelligence gathering against foreign targets. 2. Figure out how other countries could be doing the same thing and using it against the US. And lastly, perform laboratory experiments to find ways to improve remote viewing for use in the intelligence field. The program was roughly as covert as it gets. Some scientists on the Stargate program say security staff would brief them about the sensitivity of their highly classified work every 2 weeks and ask them if they had any reason to believe anyone outside of the project knew anything about it. In one of Stargate's research experiments, 40 subjects were tasked with recognizing features of randomly composed faces. According to the 1990 research report, which has since been made public, the work was seen as particularly promising in helping to locate missing persons or to identify criminals. The psychics were brought to Fort Meade in Maryland and assigned targets that ranged from Red Army bases to Kremlin bunkers to Soviet research centers. And Congress just kept authorizing money for the remote watching program during the greater half of the following 2 decades. It seems to me a hell of a cheap radar system, and if the Russians have it and we don't, we're in serious trouble. Those were the exact words from Representative Charlie Rose of North Carolina as he told fellow members of the House Select Committee on Intelligence during a meeting about psychic research in 1979. They continued the program, and this time another talented remote viewer by the name of Joseph McMonagle surfaced. Between 1978 and 1984, McMonagle participated in over 450 operations, such as helping the Army identify hostages in Iran and alerting CIA operatives to the shortwave radio hidden in the pocket calculator of a suspected KGB agent seized in South Africa. A normal workday for him consisted of envelopes and instructions to provide details on whatever was inside, and his area of expertise were near-death experiences, out-of-body travel, and lastly, UFOs. The mission with UFOs was the one that stood out the most, not because he discovered aliens, but because he was able to somehow find himself on Mars, and in millions of years back in the past. Let me explain what I mean and what actually happened. During the 1984 experiment, he was given a sealed envelope containing information about the planet Mars, the time of interest being 1 million years BC, and he was to write out what he saw. Personally, I'm pretty sure the person who wrote that did it as a sort of joke, like how we joke and mess around with ChatGPT. But McMonagle didn't know what was inside, and probably assumed it was another mission rescuing someone, so he got to work. Only this time, it felt different. The sensation was different from what he was used to, eerie even, but he kept going. He reported seeing very large, thin people dressed in some kind of strange clothes, as well as seeing obelisks and pyramids. When he finally learned what the envelope contained, McMonagle was stumped. Not only did he somehow see Mars, but if we were to take into account his ability, that would mean he saw what Mars looked like 1 million years ago. He traveled back in time to another planet, and this is a notion that he strongly believes. And remember, with remote viewing, distance never played a factor as an obstruction in what could be viewed. And to even support his claim, NASA discovered a monolith on Mars in 1998 from images taken by the Mars Global Surveyor. Now, one thing about remote viewing is that it can be befogging or confusing. It's like this: 1 + 1 = 2, right? But with remote viewing, the person knows the answer is 2, but instead of saying 1 + 1, the remote viewer, due to how confusing things might be, could say 4 divided by 2, which still gives us 2. I hope you understand, because McMonagle said he saw obelisks and pyramids, and 14 years later, NASA discovered a monolith. So my theory is that McMonagle did see that monolith, or to be specific, saw a huge piece of rock and thought it was an obelisk. Now, obelisks, monoliths, and pyramids in a way mean the same thing, which is just a big piece of rock. Now, this was all discovered using his ability, and nothing else. Now, you might say that's a coincidence, but I'll say that's one heck of a coincidence, don't you think? Now remember, all these were done in secret, so the public had no idea that the government was working on building a team of X-Men. But humans being humans, someone talked, and little by little, there were rumors that the government had a secret program on psychic research, to the point it became sort of mainstream at one time. So what does the government do to defend itself from these allegations? Simple. It denied and lied, like it always does. Publicly, the Pentagon kept denying it was funding any form of psychic study, even while reports of the operation leaked out in 1980. They continued denying it until 1995, when the CIA published a paper based on independent American Institutes for Research acknowledging the long-rumored efforts of the US government toward remote viewing for military and intelligence uses. They also declared that the project was a failure. In their words, it remains unclear whether the existence of a paranormal phenomenon, remote viewing, has been demonstrated. They concluded that any information remote viewing had provided had been too vague and ambiguous, and did not produce actionable intelligence. That should be it, right? Case closed. But when have you ever seen the government give up programs that cost them $20 million? In 2014, the Office of Naval Research launched a 4-year program costing some $3.85 million to explore the use of premonition or intuition, which is popularly known as a sixth sense among sailors and Marines to help them in battle. So to be precise, once again, the research is still going on, just under a different name. But despite all these proofs, there are still some people who think otherwise and say we are making mountains out of nothing. Usually, I would have a section of this video for believers, but hey, this is real. We have images, witness reports, and documented things, so we can't say it's a lie. But despite all this proof, there are still some who say Project Stargate isn't real. So let's look at their reason for it. The whole thing came to an official end in the mid-1990s, when the CIA started declassifying its records on remote viewing research to enable an outside assessment of the project, and the DIA quickly adopted similar action. The CIA requested an external examination of the Stargate program in June 1995 from the American Institutes for Research, AIR, which is an Arlington, Virginia-based organization assigned with assessing and offering technical support in behavioral and social science research. AIR invited 2 researchers with different points of view on parapsychology to produce the report so that it would show a fair assessment of the scientific validity of the program. Jessica Utts, Ph.D., an accomplished statistician and now professor emerita at the University of California, was on the believer's side. She viewed parapsychology as a promising science. And on the opposing side was Ray Hyman, Ph.D., a renowned psychologist and now professor emeritus at the University of Oregon, who is a noted skeptic and critic of parapsychology. So you see, we are not the only channel to play the middle ground. While also considering data from the larger scientific community at the time, Jessica and Ray separately examined hundreds of Stargate tests. And here's the thing, they both reached the same conclusion. Jessica believed the figures were interesting and felt the studies offered convincing proof that remote viewing is a human capability. She supported this notion in the fact that the findings of experiments conducted in several labs were all similar, which in itself is remarkable. As a scientist, once you have a theory, you have to prove the theory without doubt, replicate the theory, and then let others do the same with your theory. And if they arrive at the same conclusion as you, then your theory becomes a well-grounded fact. And that was what Jessica saw that convinced her. Ray, the critic, also agreed with Jessica to that degree, but it wasn't enough to convince him fully about remote viewing. He discovered that the experimental results were not consistent enough with tests outside the program after spotting what he thought to be possible faults in the experimental techniques, including utilizing the same person to assess psychic ability in every trial. Still, in the final report, he noted, "The case for psychic functioning seems better than it has ever been. The contemporary findings, along with the output of the Stargate program, do seem to indicate that something beyond odd statistical hiccups is taking place." And I'm happy he said that, because most critics focus on the fact that the government discontinued the program because it was useless or was inconsistent, and that the number of failures was greater than the number of successes. And while that makes sense, they forget to understand that just being correct once alone is an amazing feat. Then to replicate it with 10 to 20% success rate is superhuman. Make no mistake, there were many successful projects that came about over the course of Project Stargate and its previous forms. At the Stanford Research Institute, the minimum accuracy mark of 65% was said to have been surpassed regularly during experiments later in the program. I mean, take the case of another remote viewer, Angela Della Fiora Ford. During the program, her ability was put to the test when she was asked in 1989 to help track down a former customs agent who had gone rogue and was on the run.
I was called into session and my boss asked me, "Where is Charles Jordan?"
In 1989, Ford says she was able to psychically track down a former customs agent who had allegedly gone rogue.
I said, "The man is in Lowell, Wyoming," and I spelled it Lowell.
Ford was off by a letter. It was Lovell, Wyoming.
Well, when my boss went to Customs and said, "We're still getting the Wyoming feeling," Customs said, "As we are speaking, we are apprehending Charles Jordan 100 miles west of Lovell, Wyoming."
She was only off by one letter. Or Rosemary Smith, who was able to help guide the CIA to a lost aircraft that belonged to the Soviet Union. By doing so, the United States was able to locate the plane and extract important information from it. The success of Smith led the CIA to continue recruiting remote viewers, which is how Army veteran Joseph McMonagle would become involved in the program. It's outstanding, and the crazy thing is, we all have this in us, that deep gut feeling of something wrong about to go down, and that sixth sense of avoiding that alley or leaving mere minutes before a shootout occurs. We all have this. It's a gift from God, but due to chasing money, we trade this innate gift for riches and a comfortable lifestyle, and those who stick with this ability are called crazy or fraud. Except now, the CIA is doing everything to utilize the gift, but for warfare. And even though it says it was officially discontinued, there are still rumors that the program still exists today, only under a different moniker, which tallies to how the government behaves. They first discredit your theory and call you crazy. Then they take your theory and study it behind you, but under a different name so as not to associate it with you. But it's the same meaning and procedures. And then, years later, come out to release an outdated memo to say you were right. We've seen it with Project MK Ultra, with UFOs now rebranded as UAPs, with the drug-related charges levied against the CIA and them toppling the government. So tell me, do you really believe that such an organization that is known for lying will end up telling the truth? Also, one thing someone said in the report, and I say someone because their name was redacted, was that the whole research focus was wrong in the first place. More focus should have been placed on understanding the fundamental levels of what makes this work, which the intelligence community hardly had patience for. They wanted practical results fast and now, and I'm not even talking of small progressive results. I mean they wanted to create a Jean Grey from the X-Men in less than 5 years from scratch. These organizations all sought fast and pertinent answers free from consideration for basic mechanisms or experimental variables. I mean, do you know what it means for me to sit in my house and just randomly guess your house and the street you live in? And then, just because I mistake the color of your house or the name of your pet, you discredit the whole thing? That's what these intelligence communities did, forgetting it was an amazing feat in the first place that I could guess where you live and the name of your street. Sadly, this feedback went unappreciated. Honestly, I think if this wasn't an important project, the government wouldn't have invested $20 million and extensively studied it. The documents on the project can be found on the internet, but believe me, you can't go through them all because it's 12 million long. Yes, 12 million declassified reports on the project. And even what I shared in this video is just the surface level, because if I were to do a deep dive into this project, this video would be 24 hours long, and yet there would still be plenty of information to cover. There's a link in the description where you can access some of the files. So once again I ask, do you still think this project was a mistake after hearing those astronomical numbers? Now, if you still don't believe despite all this proof, maybe you will believe Pat Price in this video that's all about the Alaska Triangle, because whatever he saw got him killed 2 days later.